Welcome back to AFL Timeline History, and Stokes, we are on to Madden 13 Season 6. We're not slowing down at all. Definitely going to get through this season, probably going to get through another season. We mentioned on the last show that no AFC team had won a Super Bowl yet, but that changes here as Super Bowl 16, Madden 13 Season 6, goes to Hans Seahawks. It was a rematch of Super Bowl 14, which was Season 4, Ridge's Ravens against Hans Hawks. Han lost in Season 4. Ridge loses this time around in Season 6. Han gets on the board and gets his fourth AFL Super Bowl victory, putting him in elite company.
Yeah, up until this point, there was a running gag between him and myself that he hadn't won any bowls since I had joined AFL, and I think that was to some extent important to him because of he and I's history. So I mean, when you get multiple bowls in any league, that really separates yourself. And I mean, he had just gotten his fourth, and there was only three of us that had that. So, and to this day, there's only five now that have that many bowls.
So Ridge and Han play in the Super Bowl. To get to the Super Bowl, Han beats my Redskins in the conference championship game, and he beat Cheese's Giants in the division round. His Seahawks to get the bye. For Ridge to get to the Super Bowl, round 5 goes to Ridge. Ridge beats your Bills in the conference championship game. And at this point, Stokes, I think this was the first time you guys played where the game was actually in Baltimore. It seemed like up until this point, because Ridge was in a division with guys like Bailey and Joker, and you were just sweeping your division, all the games were in Buffalo. So I also felt like at this point in Madden 13, and I don't remember if you remember this, but I certainly do, I don't think that you're a bad team builder, but I don't know that early on in Madden 13 if you were as dedicated to AFL as you were later on. And I feel like Ridge had built a much stronger team, whereas your Bills looked a lot like they did Season 1, where you had Chris Johnson, but not a lot of other big moves. And Ridge had just built his team up with a bunch of trades, and it almost looked like a man amongst boys whenever you guys played as far as talent level on those teams.
I could agree with that. To this point, AFL was probably my second league as far as where I had them on my in my mind, and this rivalry with Ridge really took AFL to the front burner, so to speak, in my mind, and I really was just dependent on Chris Johnson. He was pretty much my offense. I had a couple pass plays that I liked, but it was mainly about Chris Johnson, and Ridge was able to bottle him up in most games, and if he was able to do that, he would win the game. And his defense was legit, and that really, I think, as you said, over the course of Madden, his defense, his overall team, they got further ahead of mine, and I wasn't able to cover that gap with the adjustments that I could make, because I felt that Rich and I were equal players, and his roster was better than mine, and that's not his fault. It's my fault because I didn't make enough moves to combat that, and it fared out.
So it wasn't about X's and O's; it was about Jimmys and Joes. You like that?
No, I don't. I don't like Jimmy at all.
Well, okay, not Jimmy in the sense of you, but the dudes on the roster, not the schemes. It's also worth mentioning that Joker's Bengals were one of the teams that Ridge beat along the way to the Super Bowl. So Joker had cracked through and made it to the Super Bowl against you in Season 3, but after Season 4, falling to Han in the conference championship game, decided that he would rather go to the AFC side. And now 2 seasons in a row, his Bengals lose to Ridge, and Joker would fire himself again this offseason, and then he'd go back to the NFC with the Giants, as Stop Cheesin fired himself and wound up with the Texans. But Han gets his Super Bowl win, and Ridge loses his second time in an AFL Super Bowl. And Stokes, Season 7 of Madden 13 is going to be a monumental one, because we've talked about Han, we've talked about Ridge, we've talked about you, but in Season 7, AFL might have brought in an owner who outranks them all. We'll talk about who that is on the next edition of AFL Timeline History.